Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Akkad Reader's Briefing, the podcast that turns a full issue of a major magazine into a 30 to 60 minutes audio pack. Today, we are bringing you a reader's guide to the August 17th, 2026 issue of The New Yorker.
This issue's cover is created by Edward Steed and is titled Midnight Bloom. Dark seawater fills the image. Pink, blue, green, purple, and lemon yellow jellyfish drift in from every direction. Their bells carry smiles that resemble children's drawings, while their fine tentacles cross through the darkness like a quiet, crowded midnight garden. Each jellyfish appears to have its own color and posture, yet all are pulled by the same invisible current. They move close to one another, but cannot fully decide where they will drift. The tension between their bright forms and the dark background keeps the cover suspended between friendliness and unease. This feeling closely echoes the issue. The power of the United States Supreme Court, Russia's detention system, corporate control of digital identity, artificial intelligence data centers, urban surveillance, end-of-life care, and the transatlantic order may seem distant from one another, but all ask how an individual lives within vast institutional, technological, and historical forces.
This issue revolves around 5 major questions. First, when Chief Justice John Roberts insists that the Supreme Court is a neutral institution while expanding presidential power, weakening voting protections, and advancing a long conservative legal program, where do the court's rituals and its actual politics collide? Second, when Russia wraps the detention of Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilians in criminal prosecutions and military trials, how do torture, disappearances, and long imprisonment become institutionalized? Third, as bots begin to outnumber people online, will iris scanning and corporate digital identity take over the work of proving identity that once belonged to the state? Fourth, how will the post-war order built through the Marshall Plan, NATO, and European integration respond to populism, doubts about alliances, and transatlantic security separation? Fifth, when end-of-life doulas help patients and families discuss medical preferences, choices about death, conflicts over care, grief, and farewell, can the final stage of life retain more autonomy and dignity?
Taken together, this issue of The New Yorker examines how power moves from large institutions into ordinary life. Court decisions reach citizenship and voting rights. Wartime detention reaches bodies and families. Digital identity reaches the gateways to communication and exchange. And data centers and surveillance systems reach electricity, water, public space, and daily movement. End-of-life care and the history of the body further remind us that the reliability of an institution is revealed in how it treats life at its most vulnerable. Writing on exile and wilderness, along with theater, film, and poetry, preserves another capacity. It helps people recognize experience inside a rapidly changing reality and protects room for difficult judgment. Next, we turn to the individual article briefings in this issue.
Section 1. War, Law, and Geopolitical Order. This section moves to the power and claim neutrality of the United States Supreme Court, Russia's detention of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians, and the European security order shaped with American support. Institutions do not remain inside statutes and treaties. They reach citizenship, voting rights, bodily safety, divided families, and national choice. 1.1. The Delusions of John Roberts. Roberts has long insisted that the court belongs to no party, yet under his leadership its precedents have moved steadily rightward on affirmative action, immigration and asylum, abortion, voting law, gun rights, and the separation of church and state. The second Trump administration filed 35 emergency requests, and the court granted the government full or partial relief 25 times, often without full briefing, oral argument, or a detailed opinion. The 2024 case Trump versus United States then gave presidents criminal immunity for official acts. Roberts also dismantled a central enforcement mechanism of the Voting Rights Act and gave real force to the unitary executive theory. The article places his manners and claims of neutrality beside a long conservative legal program, showing how Reagan-era government policies shaped him and how his legal reasoning repeatedly aligned with those commitments. 1.2. The new Gulag. Russia found a way to make the illegal appear legal by moving Ukrainian detainees into its judicial system. In more than 4 years of war, about 15,000 Ukrainian soldiers were captured, and roughly 2/3 were released through exchanges. Researchers, however, confirmed that at least 1,300 Ukrainian civilians were formally prosecuted, while more than 10,000 effectively disappeared without due process or official acknowledgement. The Geneva Conventions prohibit arbitrary civilian detention, but Russia calls these people convicted criminals, leaving them outside normal prisoner exchanges. Through the experiences of Lilia Pradikian, Natalia Vlasova, Irina Navalny, and Valentina Zyalna, the report records rape, beatings, electric shocks, secret prisons, political trials, and long sentences, alongside English lessons, songs, birthday cakes, and mutual care inside the cells. If civilian prisoners are not discussed now, the article warns, they may be left behind and fall through cracks forever. 1.3. Continental Drift. Historian Glenn Morgan calls the post-war order an American Europe. The Marshall Plan encouraged economic integration, while NATO strengthened European cooperation under American leadership. This elite project helped produce 3 decades of growth and rising prosperity, but it is now being challenged by American populism, European right-wing nationalism, and doubts about transatlantic security. Trump's contempt for NATO rejects a central premise of the order, leading Morgan to write that American Europe is over. Europe has expanded weapon production and defense budgets, yet any significant strategic autonomy remains a distant, multi-generational goal. The article also leaves open another possibility. Trump's America may provoke a backlash like Brexit and ultimately make Europeans see themselves first as Europeans.
Section 2. Artificial Intelligence, Data Infrastructure, and Surveillance Governance. This section brings together 3 converging questions of governance. How does an online system prove that someone is human? Who carries the electricity, water, and public costs of artificial intelligence data centers? And how do city cameras turn ordinary movement into searchable long-term records? 2.1. Bot or not? Bots now outnumber human beings online. Companies must admit good bots that act for customers while blocking bad bots that steal their data. World uses the orb to scan irises and verify a World ID, which it hopes will become a credential for video calls, dating, online stores, and electronic signatures. About 40 million people have completed some level of verification, including roughly 18 million who received the highest orb verification. Yet Argentina, Brazil, Germany, Kenya, Portugal, South Korea, and other countries have investigated, prohibited, or penalized the system. By connecting passports, fingerprints, social security numbers, and biometric databases to the present, the article identifies the central problem. A for-profit international company without democratic authorization is acquiring powers that once belonged to nation-states. To prove that they are not machines, people are handing bodily data to a machine. 2.2. Reading the data. A Gallup survey found that about 70% of Americans opposed hyperscale data centers in their own communities, including 63% of Republicans. More than 4,000 centers had already been built, with another 4,000 planned. The facilities are enormous, offer relatively few jobs after construction, and constrain local electricity and cooling water systems. In the first 3 months of 2026 alone, at least 75 projects worth about $130 billion were stopped. Politicians, therefore, moved from celebration to audits, limits, and moratoriums. The article turns data centers from a local dispute into a national political question. Will artificial intelligence infrastructure benefit ordinary people, or mainly the billionaires behind the technology?
Moratoriums may not halt development because projects can move to friendlier jurisdictions or overseas.
2.3. Smile. Atlanta has more than 60,000 surveillance cameras, giving it the highest per capita concentration outside China. Anti-surveillance activists Austin Krall and Ed Vogel led a spy hunt through the city, identifying pan, tilt, and zoom cameras, automatic license plate readers, acoustic sensors, and police surveillance trailers. License plate data is uploaded to a database searchable by thousands of police officers nationwide, and United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement can access it as well. Participants repeatedly asked whether the cameras actually made anyone safer. At the end, the group stopped for water beneath a tree, and Vogel said that trees keep you safe.
Section 3. Life, the Body, and the Ethics of Care. This section moves through end-of-life care, the history of women's bodies, cognitive decline and assisted death, illness on stage, and a flower that opens for one night. The subjects overlap, but they arrive through reporting, historical records, fiction, comedy, and poetry.
3.1. End of story. End-of-life doulas offer active listening, unconditional acceptance, life review, companionship, and communication rather than medical treatment. Hospice emphasizes dignity and comfort instead of curative care. Yet modern medicine has also prolonged dying and moved death from homes into hospitals. Nearly 1/5 of the United States population is 65 or older, and in 2024 more than half of Medicare beneficiaries who died received hospice care. The International End-of-Life Doula Association trained more than 10,000 people in a decade, while the University of Vermont program trained more than 5,000. Doulas help families discuss where a person wishes to die, who should be present, what music should play, medical preferences, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, and medical aid in dying. The field has no uniform regulation or required certification, so fees and quality vary. It cannot replace medicine, but it can change family conflict, caregiving time, and the experience of dying.
3.2. Presence. This hidden history of the female body draws on physicians' casebooks, midwifery manuals, household recipe books, court testimony, and private letters to recover women's bodily experience from the 16th through the 19th centuries. It shows that supposedly natural processes, such as childbirth and breastfeeding, were repeatedly shaped by changing medical beliefs and social arrangements. During the 18th century, breastfeeding came under a coarse moralism. It ceased to be understood as paid labor and was recast as the central scene of sentimental motherhood. 3.3. The Blight. After cognitive decline began, David traveled to Zurich to end his life legally without first telling his daughter. He feared the continued loss of memory and control and the prospect of no longer directing his own life. When his daughter arrived, their conversations returned to his plan, his earlier absence, and the companionship still possible at the end. As the appointment approached, David felt that it was too soon and that he was not ready. Finally, after the bill was taken away, he placed both hands on the cleared table and said, "Ready, let's get up."
3.4. Kat Cohen, Broad Strokes. In her one-woman musical comedy, Kat Cohen says that having a stroke at 30 was not in her 5-year, 10-year, or 50-year plan. The stroke, caused by a hole in her heart, joins her first migraine with visual aura at 12, a ruined summer trip to Europe, and a parade of clinicians in the show's sprawling catalog of hypochondria. The songs often feel like impressions of impressions. What truly shines is Cohen's physical comedy.
3.5. Cereus. After dinner, a half-dead, night-blooming Cereus suddenly opened, and everyone leaned toward the enormous pale flower and its sweet scent. The plant had passed from the gardener Johnny to Beth, then to the warden's wife, and finally to Sylvia, while the earlier owners were now gone. Its petals made grief look foolish and guilt look brief, returning the body to the people gathered around it. By dawn, the flower had shriveled and disappeared.
Section 4. Intellectual History, Media, and Social Imagination. This section returns to Hannah Arendt's Exile and American Writing, asks what remains of wilderness in an age of pervasive human intervention, and uses a fictional newsroom crisis to satirize overproduction in cultural coverage. Each piece examines how language, development, and attention rearrange reality. For point 1, the uses of exile. Hannah Arendt arrived in New York in 1941 as a stateless refugee and later produced major writing on totalitarianism, statelessness, public freedom, and political lying. She argued that totalitarian movements replace reality with changing fictions. The leader's lies become an operating world, while outsiders are insulted, stripped of rights, rendered stateless, and driven into camps. In her final known interview, she warned that when everyone lies to you continuously, the result is not that you believe the lies. It is that no one believes anything any longer. People then lose not only the capacity to act, but also the capacity to think and judge.
4.2. The Savage Landscape. In a world where human intervention reaches almost everywhere, Cal Flynn traveled to the Transylvanian Alps, Mozambique's Nyassa Special Reserve, and the Southern Ocean near Antarctica to ask what it means to call a place wilderness. She described wilderness as a negative definition, an absence. Remote places face pressure from trophy hunting, scientific research, and corporate development. At the same time, wilderness can mean opening oneself to the vastness of all existence, all creation, and everything.
4.3. Eat the Lotus. This satire invents a crisis at the New York Times. Editors suddenly discover that the next day's paper may contain no article about Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. The newspaper has already produced material on helmets, casting, translators, profiles, pizza making in its test kitchen, and culture war arguments, yet it still treats a blank day as a disaster. War in the Middle East, European heat, and the falling yen are quickly converted into Homeric analogies. As public interest in Homer begins to fade, the newsroom starts preparing for Mel Gibson's The Resurrection of the Christ, Part 1. Cultural coverage has no natural endpoint. It only needs the next grand subject that can be developed without limit.
Section 5. Visual, Stage, and Screen Arts. This section brings together a gallery review, concert coverage, a coming-of-age film, journalistic theater, horror comedy, and a two-person stage romance. Bodies, voices, venues, and narrative structures turn private experience into public performance and preserve memory, training, disagreement, and difficult relationships. 5.1. Crazy Talk. William Pope L. Used crawling, food, paper, sculpture, and performance to push social criticism between absurdity and apparent disorder. He once crossed Manhattan on his hands and knees in a pinstriped suit. In another work, he sat on a raised toilet for days and ate the Wall Street Journal with ketchup and milk. The Drawing Center exhibition extends this principled irrationality into works on paper. Pope L lets multiple voices flow through the body, moving sharply among slavery, higher education, poverty, and racial classification, while tragedy and farce keep changing places. 5.2. Olivia Dean. British singer Olivia Dean moved from viral social media breakthroughs through a record deal, late-night television, and Glastonbury. This year, Man I Need, from her second album, The Art of Loving, turned virality into ubiquity and put her on the path toward a Grammy nomination for Best New Artist. The album shows her growing into a warm, vintage pop and rhythm and blues sound. She then played Madison Square Garden with Baby Rose, another singer with an old soul and a timeless voice. 5.3. Tony. Tony returns to the summer of 1975 and follows the brash, callow college student Anthony Bourdain as he discovers a culinary calling. Literary ambition, risk-taking, substance abuse, and adolescent desire take him to Provincetown. Misadventure eventually leaves him on the porch of a sympathetic chef and restaurateur. The volatile kitchen gives him a sense of adult responsibility. The film can feel like a just-so story, but it also suggests that every apparent destiny contains the caprices of chance.
5.4. Witnessing. Dan Hoyle performs only people who actually exist. He interviews strangers and carries their voices, faces, and movements onto the stage, calling the method journalistic theater. In Takes All Kinds, he looks for people who were not natural activists, but stumbled into reconciliation and change, hoping that complicated stories can disrupt surface judgments. In the South Bronx, he reconnects with Pop and his friends and hears about their jobs, block parties, and exaggerated stories of danger. Pop finally refuses to remain only source material. He asks to get into the show and take a place on stage. 5.5. Summer Camp. Teenage sex and death at Camp Miasma combines the personal awakening of sleepaway camp with bloody slasher violence. Hannah Einbinder plays a filmmaker hired to reboot a classic horror franchise, and Gillian Anderson plays the reclusive original Final Girl. The two discuss their feelings, have sex, and are then chased by a spear-wielding killer named Little Death. In a Halloween costume store, Einbinder reflects on childhood, candy, trauma therapy, and the relation between comedy and horror. Both, she says, involve tension building in the body and then some kind of release.
5.6. Shifters. The two-person romance Shifters begins in the wake of Dre's beloved grandmother, where Des, a close friend who disappeared years earlier, suddenly returns. The play then shuffles time like a deck of tarot cards. At 16, they recognize each other as the only black students in philosophy class. In their 30s, they sort through Nana's belongings and circle a life they fail to build together. Not every philosophical detour lands, but Heather Agipong and Daniel Ezra negotiate the play's hairpin turns with the ease of figure skaters moving in unison.
Section 6. Literature, Poetry, and Reading. This section includes a poem rooted in the streets of Tehran, a set of personal reading recommendations, and 2 short reviews of contemporary novels. The pieces move through urban trauma, desire and marriage, writing ambition, expanding families, unfinished sentences, and persistent memory.
6.1. Horses. In Horses, several people sit in a cafe with scorched hair and the streets of Tehran packed inside their chests. They are horses without wings, manes, or fields, thinking only of running from the strangled throat of the streets. Trees become batons, and fists are hidden beneath tables, in beds, kitchen drawers, and pockets. Wherever a hand touches Tehran, it hurts, and every part of the day is night. The poet finally says that he lacks the courage to finish the sentence. The poem was shot dead in its opening lines, or else it would never end. 6.2. What we're reading. Sheila Heti recommends 3 books. Jane Bowles's Two Serious Ladies follows only its own rules and logic and changed Hetty's sense of how fiction could be written. Emile Zola's The Lady's Paradise brings together marketing, advertising, the swallowing of small shops by large stores, and the hard life of a provincial salesgirl in Paris. Vigdis Hjorts, if only, traveled with Hetty from a subway station to a plane and a hotel, making movement inseparable from the vertigo of loving the wrong man, being rejected, being taken back, suffering, and moving through every turn of the relationship. 6.3. It's All River. This short, fevered novel follows the sex worker Lucy as she inserts herself into a married couple's life. She meets the husband in a brothel, where he becomes the first man to reject the highly desired Lucy, and she responds with increasingly extreme attempts to seduce him. At the same time, the marriage's secrets emerge, including the husband's violent jealousy. Carla Madera weaves 3 compelling perspectives together and summons an impressive emotional range within a relatively brief novel. 6.4. The Shampoo Effect. Caroline has just been ghosted by a careless man when a story of hers appears in this magazine. She impulsively quits her job to write full-time, a complicated decision because her mother is a successful writer and probably a narcissist. At a seaside whiting residency in Massachusetts, Caroline falls in love with a local man and meets the friends he grew up with, including one who is pregnant with his child. The novel describes a season in which an expanding family tests friendship, and the fulfillment of ambition tests it as well.
Section 7. Urban Life, Public Space, and Consumer Culture. This section follows a jazz community, a New York restaurant, a public dance festival, a Queen slogan, and an experimental dance space run by young artists. Together, the pieces show urban culture growing through live exchange, public space, service work, neighborhood memory, and institutional collaboration.
7.1. Jazz Generations Initiative. The Jazz Generations Initiative tries to bridge generational and disciplinary divisions by emphasizing how jazz is shaped by in-person community. Its New York chapter arranges events that put jazz in motion around the city. Drummer and composer Savannah Harris curated a performance featuring experimental soul artist Kia, saxophonist and bandleader Emmanuel Wilkins, and bassist and disc jockey Omo Igi. Their creative sensibilities differ, but they occupy a shared artistic spectrum and are connected by a common purpose. 7.2. Somssi. Somssi uses lace curtains, vintage baking tins turned into sconces, and mismatched wooden furniture to create an apparently effortless charm. Its Korean name roughly means time-honed skill, and nearly every dish contains a twist or a moment of clarity. The menu mixes Korean flourishes with other influences, although the dish called potato, 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 and caviar feels like an overworked packet of luxury. The restaurant's real excitement comes from Aris Kim, who works the floor every night and touches each table with a greeting, a smile, or the friendly retrieval of a fallen napkin. Her skill is so practiced that it looks like relaxation, the easy power at the heart of the restaurant. 7.3. Battery Dance Festival. The 45th Battery Dance Festival still rests on 2 signature strengths: its outdoor setting against New York Harbor at sunset, and the variety of local and international companies on the same program. Every performance is free. The schedule includes United States premieres from Brazil, Romania, Spain, and Taiwan, and one evening remains devoted to Indian dance. Battery Dance, now 50 years old, also presents new works by Sidra Bell and former New York City ballet star Jacques Soto. 7.4. Futurama. In 2007, artists Eve Biddle and Joshua Frankel painted Queens is the Future on a handball court in Jackson Heights, using a subway escaping its tracks to evoke the borough's diversity and futurist tradition. A corporate campaign later added Spider-Man, provoking an argument about the co-opting of public art, and the original mural was eventually restored. After the first Queens resident became mayor, the phrase moved on to highway welcome signs. Among aging infrastructure, city branding, immigration, nationalism, and unseasonable heat, the article asks whether Queens truly is the future. 7.5. Pageant at MoMA. A small loft above a beauty supply store in East Williamsburg has become a center of dance experimentation. Pageant, run by young choreographers and artists, presents scrappy and adventurous work. It resembles a contemporary version of Soho lofts or East Village theaters in the 1980s. The Museum of Modern Art then hosted a day-long marathon of short pieces by pageant artists, giving audiences a concentrated view of the scene without requiring a trip to East Williamsburg.
All right, we are now ready to enter today's main program. Before we do, please like, save, and share this episode so that other people who need it can also see today's content and become better versions of themselves. Thank you. You can now use the timeline in the video description or the pinned comment to find the articles that interest you and listen to them in depth.